Welcome back to Kinda Christian. I know, folks, it's been a while and you've had to wait so long. We had John Mark Comer last week, and I was thinking, who better to top that episode than to welcome my dear friend, a legend in his own right, the man who preaches with an accent that is commensurate with God's voice himself. I would like us to welcome Jon Tyson to Kinda Christian. John, thank you for being here, man.
Well, thanks for having me, mate. Actually, I think the Scottish accent is the voice of God. If you were to hear God speak to you and you just say, read your Bible, you would read your Bible.
That'd be fun, like, exercise to think about is, like, if you're, like, who's the best person to do, like, to read the Bible? I mean, James Earl Jones is sort of the classic, but if you, like, when he came down from the
classic.
But you come down from the mountain, you're right, and it's just like, 10 commandments I've got for all of you. Thou shalt not covet.
You've heard it say, but I say to you, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you.
We have a little
Scotland.
We have a little game. We were doing that with some friends. We were coming up with TikTok videos because, why not? Why not come up with TikTok videos? And move this over here. And we were thinking like Star Wars characters. Like if you had Darth Sidious be like, "No one comes to the Father except through me," or
yes.
Ecclesiastes like, "To everything there is a season, a time to live and a time to die."
We have so much to work with, don't we?
I know, we have so much. So I think the first question on Kinda Christian that I just really wanted to throw out there to you is, like, how big of an honor is it for you to be here? I mean, can you really put into words the feelings you have coming onto this podcast?
What's that Zach Galifianakis show, Between Trees?
Between Two Ferns.
Between Two Ferns. I mean, the only honor I could think bigger than being on this show would be on that show. So it's sort of up there with that.
That's right. Okay, well, good. Obviously, I like to give guests a safe space to process what they're feeling.
A chance to be able to share the honor. Yes,
I know. Well, actually, so it's funny. You and I have a great origin story. I'm going to see if you remember this. Do you remember our first actual interaction? It was a great story, but see if you remember it because I will never forget.
Okay, what it could be. There was a season when I was discipling my son where one of the things that we did together was a thing called freeletics, which was high-intensity bodyweight workouts, all named after Greek gods. And the workouts were all named after Greek gods. This is probably 2015-ish, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Doing great.
So I would get up every morning, and these things took between 20 and 40 minutes, and I was on a super tight program. And so you were at a retreat where I was speaking at the retreat, and then you came early in the morning, and I was probably doing some like crazy thing that seemed inappropriate for that hour. That's about it.
It was a tiny little room up at this lodge in upstate New York through Praxis, and you were doing this freeletics was awful. It was like 6 a.m. and we're doing burpees in the morning, and it was awful. And it was like, I mean, literally wake up out of bed and just go straight in. And it was so cool to see. And I think it's so illustrative of your character as a pastor too. Because, instead of my first image is Jon Tyson, like sitting there, meditating, bringing in the Holy Spirit. I know it's like, open the door. And he's like, mate, let's go. And just like burpees, push-ups. It was 20 minutes of, I think you honestly illustrated what an eternal torment could be like.
Can you imagine that? Imagine having to do endless burpees.
That's actually one of my top 3 scenarios, I think, of what hell could be like. The other one is you're on the 405 in traffic and it just you never get to your destination. It's just sort of there,
The 405, mate, I've been stuck on the 405 for hours before.
Oh,
Not a fan.
Not a fan.
That's why I love motorbikes, mate. Lane splitting's legal in Cali. You just go straight through that mess.
There you go. See, already spiritual allegories abound. So, well, we should probably dive in and give the folks something useful to listen to besides our nostalgia here. But I appreciate you being here. I'm so excited to dig into your book, The Intentional Father. I love listening to you. You have such a unique... I think one thing that I've always appreciated about you is you seem to have one foot firmly entrenched in each of the seemingly disparate camps. Like there's this Pentecostal charismatic bent that comes out, but there's also this deep liturgical, beautiful like understanding. And not many people, I mean, I can't believe I'm going to compliment you, but there's not many people I feel like who straddle both those worlds so well. And I find myself going, wait, where does he belong? I can't categorize him, you know? And I think that's, I don't know if you get that, but that's one of my favorite things about you and your ministry. I'll hear you go, he belongs in a old-fashioned evangelical church. Like, no, I could also see him at the revival, the tent revival, you know?
Well, I appreciate that. That is certainly me trying to be faithful to my story. So I became a Christian in Assemblies of God Revival, went on, got mentored by Keller. I mean, I'm trying to live out of both my heart and my head, you know?
Wow. You got mentored by Keller. That's obviously a high bar to achieve. So he is sort of the Yoda. That would just make you a little bit of a Obi-Wan Kenobi. But I want to start off, on this show, we actually try to dig into some of the deeper questions and just tough things about faith. Let me ask you this. What is a mystery of God or something that you still have a tough time with? You're comfortable with it being unresolved, but it's something that still nags you, maybe in the middle of the night.
How God speaks to people. The voice of God. I wish it was clearer. I wish it was clearer. I wish there was like a definitive way and you just got it. It's not even that clear in the New Testament. I mean, Paul's like bouncing around trying to serve God in the book of Acts, and the Holy Spirit forbids him, but he still doesn't get direction. He's just like, can't go there. Then Paul has a dream, and in the dream he sees the Macedonian call, and it says, so we concluded. So, the Holy Spirit, he only tells him not what to do in some nebulous way, and then he sees a vision. God could have just said, hey, Paul, I want you to go to Macedonia. Like, why so indirect, so mysterious, so complicated? Yet I've heard the voice of God clearly. I mean, I wish I heard it more clearly, I guess.
I appreciate you saying that. That has always bothered me because for example, I know friends who I've seen some stuff that really blows my mind. Even in the midst of my, questions and doubts, I've seen people have these, I guess you would call them words of knowledge, where they have said things about people and people walk away going, I don't know how this guy knew that about me. I mean, that was insane. And then I wonder, why do some people hear like that? And then other people, it's like, oh, I've got this image and I think I see a possum. It could be. Does that mean anything to you? And you're like, what? Like, I mean, if he's all about, this is my biggest question. Like, if God's all about relationship, why the differing revelation per person?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Okay.
If so I knew, I wouldn't have a problem with it. It's kind of Christian. I'm like, that's a kind of answer. I don't know.
Yeah, it is, and you're right. And the Paul one's really interesting too. And then also, like, I'm always curious too, because how do you make sense of, and correct me if my chronology is wrong here, but there was prophesied, like, Paul, you can't go back to Rome, right? And he felt he was supposed to go back there and you're going to be turned over and delivered. And there was some ambiguity in how that wrapped up, right? And how...
I think you're talking about Agabus, and he didn't tell him he couldn't. He just told him it was going to be bad. He said, hey, man, this is not going to end well. And Paul's like, that's okay. Paul's original commission that God gave him is that you're going to stand before kings and emperors. He was shown how much he would have to suffer for Jesus' sake. So I think he was kind of like, hey, appreciate the intel. I'm ready for it.
Do we know how Paul finished up, by the way? Because he kind of goes, he has that cool island experience.
I mean, they think he was beheaded.
Really? Is that church tradition?
Yeah, kept in the Mamertine prison. Not crucified because he was a Roman citizen. That's what they think. Wow. If you've ever been to the Mamertine in Rome, it's one of the most staggering experiences. The first time I went there, maybe almost 15 years ago, there was almost nothing there. You could just walk in and go down into the cell, and there's quite a bit of historical proof. It's not like one of those deeply contested places, that this is where Peter was held and this is where Paul was held. And so Paul had, different imprisonments. He had the house arrest at the end of the book of Acts. This is not that. This is a later imprisonment. And it's right near the Palatine Hill. So you can if you're outside the prison, you can basically see the Forum. You can see downtown. You can see the Palatine Hill. So it's probably a 10-minute walk to Caesar Augustus's house from where Paul was imprisoned. Wow. It's like the dynamics of it are just incredible. And yeah, to sit in that prison and to read, First and Second Timothy, particularly Second Timothy, his last written words to us, and then boom, that's the end of it. But this guy in this little cell, standing in front of the power of Rome, believed in a gospel that took out Rome without violence. So it's extraordinary. It's one of the great reasons I believe in Christianity is its improbability. The whole thing's a miracle. It shouldn't exist.
Let's dive into it. That's really interesting. So there seems to be two areas where people sort of dig in on Christianity. It seems to be historical and then like personal experience, which is tough because you can't extrapolate it. But
yeah,
on the latter, would you say have you seen too much? Have you experienced too much to really let doubt sort of take hold in any area? Because I do appreciate. I think something that I've been okay with and has really helped me process a lot of that is that it seems like if Jesus towards the very end was, I don't know if he was trying to get out of the plan, but was, if there was an honest moment of like, I don't know if I want to go through with this, I feel like that gave license to be like, you can walk and see and heck, we know people in that time period saw crazy things and still didn't believe. And so it's those things don't make faith for you. And so no matter how far you've walked, I got to imagine that even people who've done this professionally do this still have these mysteries and doubts and,
Well, I mean, it depends what you're talking about. The question is, have I seen enough to not believe? I've seen enough to believe, but seeing enough to believe doesn't mean you won't disbelieve. Demas, because he loved this world, has forsaken me. Demas saw so much stuff. Judas saw quite a bit of stuff too. The question I would say is this. So it's like, have you seen enough where you can't not believe? No, I mean, you can have a bad day and you can doubt everything. I mean, being just because you're married to a beautiful woman doesn't mean you're ever tempted. You're not tempted. I mean, it's like, that's not the nature of faith. I would say this. I believe that God has been so kind to me. So kind to me. I could never turn away from his kindness. That's it. I am marked by the mercy of God. So it's kind of like Polycarp when he was killed, and he's like, 86 years I've served him, and he's been so good to me. Why would I deny him now? I definitely feel like that. That being said, my life has been filled with staggering amounts of pain. So it's not like my life has been pain-free or challenge-free or stress-free. It's just that Jesus himself has been so kind to me. I just don't think I could ever deny that. I wouldn't want to. He's been so good to me. You know what I mean? So I think that's the thing I cultivate. Faith is relational. It's primarily covenantal. It's not intellectual. Doesn't mean that there's not an academic part of it. I mean, it's faith-seeking understanding in some sense, but it's also profoundly about covenant relationship with a God who's just shown me so much mercy. Where am I going to go and do what? Look, mate, I've done it all, almost everything at this point in my life. There's no amount of money, sex, pleasure, possessions that's going to do anything better than the kindness of Jesus in my heart.
I mean, you did do an 8-hour Harley Davidson ride. I don't know what else there is.
I mean, that's kind of like peak human experience in the fall, going to the Pennsylvania wildlands.
That sounds so. That is my image of you too. Like when you carry the gospel, as I know, because you've got a cigar or you're on a bike and just always, a good brandy. It's just you don't fit the mold of the traditional pastor.
Well, I mean, I'm trying to be myself, mate. Truth through personality. That's preaching. I think that's ministry.
I love that. You're going back to I want to dig in a little bit on just hearing God and speaking. What has been fruitful for you as far as discerning God's voice in your life and how he speaks to you individually?
Well, I mean, the number one practice is fasting.
Really?
That's like, yeah, man, when you fast, it's like you get noise canceling headphones and the volume turned up. Nothing brings me further clarity on the voice of God than fasting. I hate fasting. You know what I like doing? Eating.
Oh, I do too, bro.
I like eating. But fasting is one of those things. The other thing I would say is like meditative listening through the scriptures. You know, like I was doing that this morning. I was meditating through one of the Psalms. And God says to God says to the children of Israel, "You wanted none of me." What a phrase. He says, I would have opened the heavens for you. I would have given you new wine. You would have feasted on the richest of fare, but you wanted none of me. Therefore I gave you over to the counsel of your own hearts. It's like they wanted none of me. God wanted to be wanted by his people. Meditating on that, God, how much do I want you? Is there anything in my life, Lord, that is causing me to not want you or distracting me? You know, like that took me deep. That's just like a slow reading through the lectionary. I mean, that's the Bible reading plan I follow. And I was into it. So yeah, that to me, fasting, if you need like sort of directional clarity or breakthrough, and sort of like a meditative reading. And then I'm a big believer in, two things at once, which are a bit of a contradiction, like a radical intercession and stillness and silence. Like I'm a big believer in like pray over the city and call down, blah, blah, blah. And at the same time, sitting humbly in total utter silence and just waiting for a prompting or impression of the Holy Spirit.
All right. So how do you, so that morning routine sounds amazing. I love a radical tearing down of strongholds and a stillness, but it's interesting because when I read the Gospels and I read Jesus, and it seems like everything is supposed to be emulating of Jesus. That seems to be the main message. Like you're gonna do this, you're gonna do things like he did, etc. But his prayers seem so succinct, so short, so just
Well, I mean, only the written ones that said Jesus went out and spent the evening in prayer. He spent the whole night in prayer. We don't have that content. He's dropping 10 hours on it. All we're told is that he did. That's it.
Right. Well, no, I just wonder sometimes too, like what would that's what I was going to say. I wonder what that looked like. And, I think one of the things that John Mark said that really stuck with me was just, and actually I heard Francis Chan say this too, that he said he was concerned for this generation because of this thing. He's like, you don't know how to sit and be still for 5 minutes. And I mean, it was scary the other day. I left this at home and went for a walk around the lake, and I just was like, and you tell yourself, I need my phone because like, what if the car breaks down? What if,
That's what the Apple Watch is for, mate. Apple Watch. I literally bought the Apple Watch with cellular, with cell service, so that I could leave my phone places and still be reached by my children, which is my great concern.
Well, folks, we just got a new sponsor, so let's take a brief moment and thank Apple for all your privacy and the prayer intercession needs. That's actually a good idea, because I thought about like, oh, you do want to be like, if there was an emergency, but it's funny, the first 5 minutes, I found it sort of like exercise, where when I first start running, which I hate running, just like I hate the burpees and freeletics, but the first 5 minutes, there seems this all-out rebellion when your mind is like, why are we doing this? We've left the comfort of the couch. The coffee is back there. There's a great tome of knowledge. Perhaps we could be at home in comfort by a crackling fire reading The Intentional Father. And you're out here pounding pavement. And then, you get into it and you're like, okay, now I'm kind of like, now we're cruising.
Yes,
First 5 minutes.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. This past Sunday I preached, I found some research that said like the typical person touches their phone like 2,670 something times a day. But then power users touch it like 5,200 times a day. And almost everybody I know feels like a power user. Whoa. So this was, so what's the antidote? So silence, solitude, getting into nature is hugely important. They've done research that shows 3 20-minute walks a week. So let me give you like the nature detox to reset your brain. Okay. And this is like massively researched out, particularly in Japan, where they have this concept called forest bathing. The healing properties are like surrendering to nature.
John Mark took me on a forest bath, and I said, he's like, you want to go forest bathe? And I was like, whoa, bro, what are you talking about?
Yes. So the basic gist is you need 3 20-minute walks in a park or in a natural setting a week as the absolute bare minimum. It's like a period. And you cannot have your phone with you. You cannot be listening to music. You have to be present and sort of attuning yourself to the environment. Then you need 5 hours a month in essence, non-urban park-like or suburban settings. You've got to go into the wilderness. It can still be state parks or whatever, but it's got to be a little more off-trail. You need 5 hours a month on that. And then you need at least annually a 3-day straight-up digital detox. No phone, nothing, no photos, don't pick it up. And they've got all this research that shows how your brain actually resets itself after 3 days in the wilderness, surrounded by nature. It can't just be 3 days at your house because there's a blackout. It's like a consciously chosen immersion into nature. The effects of it, there's like a halo effect. It lasts after you get out of nature. It changes the way our concentration and focus resets itself. And another big part of the question could be, why don't we hear God? It's like maybe he's talking all the time and we're just distracted into oblivion.
Oh, man. How do you do this? You live in Manhattan. When you guys are in Manhattan, does Central Park count as enough of that? I'm like, how would you?
It does. I mean, you can get into the middle of it. So I've got 2 spots. One spot is the end of a pier, which faces out onto the Hudson River. And when you look up, you just see this long river and lush green hills because Rockefeller brought all the land in New Jersey so it would never be built on and donated it back as a park because he didn't want the view to change. That's why looking up the Hudson is so amazing. And then in Hell's Kitchen, you have to, prove that you live in the neighborhood to get a key into this particular park. But I've got this key that lets me get into sort of like a secret garden. You need a key to get in and you need a key to get out. And you often see people who sneak in and they can't get out. So it's kind of funny. But this lets you sit in a place that is immersive. Wow. It is immersive. When you're in it, you could be in an English country garden. I think cultivating those sorts of spaces are very, very important. Jesus had places. Jesus loved to go to Bethany. It was his favorite place on earth. Jesus, went to the Garden of Gethsemane. I mean, this is a place that he would return to. They knew that he would be there. Judas led the soldiers there to arrest him. So Jesus had these places of retreat and disengagement. And, a lot of times he's praying. If you look at the rhythm of what Jesus was praying about, you see the same pattern in the book of Acts. Before anything big happened or before any big guidance was needed, Jesus was deep into prayer. So he'd go spend the night in prayer before he calls the apostles. Go spend the night in prayer before he's going to be crucified. Go spend the night in prayer before he's going to a new region for a mission. In the book of Acts, the same thing. Before the gospel goes out, you see the church praying, and then there's an expansion. And then there's normally resistance, which makes people fall back onto God in prayer. So to me, that whole rhythm of engagement and disengagement is like a huge thing. So yeah, I've tried to cultivate them my whole life. And again, this is a different topic, but how you understand God to be working in the world is very, like how you frame reality depends on your frustration with what's actually happening. So the questions of can you doubt? Why doesn't God act? I'm very disappointed. A lot of people have a sort of very sophomoric view of reality, and it goes something like this: God and me. I mean, there's other people. There's other people in the world, obviously, that are like a wonderful background cast to my story. But it's God and me. And when stuff doesn't happen to me or bad stuff happens, the only causality is basically God not doing what I want. I just don't think that's I don't think that's an adequate description of the reality in which we're living in. Life is more like a frontline war. We are in a battlefield. And if you viewed every day as like living in a city that's being occupied in the middle of World War II, and with snipers around everywhere, you'd be way closer to biblical reality, what's actually happening. So then you would have a lot of understanding and explanation of why things go wrong and while there's tension and conflict and that sort of stuff. But now we've jumped all over the place. Basically, go for a walk and imagine you live in World War II. What else is there?
That's the subject of his next book, A Walk to Very Much Remember by Jon Tyson. No, I love, and actually I can back that up because I discovered the Tetons recently and how much I love national parks. It's amazing too because I've traveled all over the world, but in the U.S., we got it made in the shade. There are so many amazing, diverse topographies, and we go hiking for like 8 days and we do like 10 miles a day. And I took my car last year and just kind of drove by myself through Montana, and
so beautiful.
Oh, and like there's nothing to like riding under a freeway under a huge storm in big sky country, and just the you realize how minute and small you are. And I just found, though, a clarity of mind, even from a physiological standpoint, something about 3 to 4 hours of just steady state exercise that I felt the most lucid I've ever felt. And I thought, man, I'm really wondering, all the modern conveniences, just being where we are, I don't know if it's worth the trade-off, because there's something that the ancients understood and had access to. And when Francis Chan was saying that he was worried about, he told this story about this guy who said, I will buy you any car you want, Lambo, anything, but you have to get rid of your smartphone and you have to have a flip phone. And he's like, that's how important he feels about it. And I thought, my inability to sit still for 5 minutes and just be and listen, I was like, hearing you talk, that makes me feel like that's actually a way bigger deal, and potentially one of the biggest hindrances to fruitfulness in life. And I probably need to take that much more seriously, because it's hard. It is hard in today's day and age. I feel beset constantly by the fierce urgency of now. I got to move now. I got to act now. And what you're saying, it seems like all the major decisions, all the breakthrough, everything big that happened started with a step back and just.
Yeah, man. I mean, I can think of no greater waste of time, channeling Peter Drucker, to be radically efficient at something that is meaningless. What a waste of your life. To be really good at stuff that doesn't matter, to be excellent and disciplined and organized at stuff that doesn't matter. So how do you figure out what matters? Well, I mean, that's the great goal of abiding with Jesus. He says, I let you know what the Father's doing. I call you friends. Everything the Father's shown me, I'll reveal it to you. But I think we've got to want to hear that. And so to me, that process of abiding, of being still, about being hungry, about being faithful, that is the essence. If you don't get that right, honestly, Jesus is apart from me, you can do nothing. It'll just all be burned up. Kingdom of the false self, ending quickly. That's most of human history.
You got a series of coffee mugs coming, bro. I can see it, John. It's like, self.
Kingdom of the false self, ending quickly.
Drink up, everybody. That's like a great coffee show. So
Eat, really drink, tomorrow we die. The kingdom of the false self is ending quickly. Eat, drink, tomorrow we die. The kingdom of the false self.
Okay, since you're tapping on this, I'm curious if you wrestle with this, not personally, but like if you're, or maybe you do, but with your people that you pastor and your congregation. But one thing I heard you talk on, and I want to get to your book in a second. You talked about the two adulthoods, and the first one seems to be from 20 to 40 and sort of occupied with roles and time. And then as you move to the second half, it becomes more about mystery and wonder and what you find fulfillment in. But I've really been I would say struggle is not the word, but I've been trying to process. I'm always trying to make sense of this, and we won't solve this today, but God's sovereignty versus my own efforts. And I love / hate that Scripture seems to have a verse to support either argument. A man's heart choose the way, but the Lord directs his steps, but work out your salvation with fear and trembling. But, or Romans, is it 9? And it's just like, some are noble vessels and some are ill noble vessels. And I'm going, this is crazy to think about. But for those who are wondering, and I'm asking because I have quite a few friends and I felt this. For those who feel like, I don't know if did I miss out on the things that God had for me? Am I doing the right things without devaluing life and how special it is? Because you could easily go, well, whatever, everything's meaningless. Eat, drink, we die tomorrow. But also, God has a plan, and I've heard you say that many times. And I'd love any thoughts, and obviously asking for a friend that you could, encourage someone who's wondering where they're at in the scheme of God's plan.
Is your question about Calvinism? Is it about the sovereignty of God and free will? I mean, how do you reconcile the sovereignty of God with free will?
Yeah, it's my attempt to ask the longest meandering question ever, and after succeeding there, 1, 2, it's just I have myself and a few other people go, look, sometimes they're reaching their mid-30s, or maybe they had the kids, and they're like, you know what, like it was all so busy, and now I'm like, what is like, did I do the right things? Like, can you miss out on God's plan? So I guess we're at that.
Obviously, the Bible is filled with warnings that you can.
Yeah.
Today, if you hear His voice, don't harden your hearts. as you did in the rebellion. I mean, like, don't shrink back. Now is the time of salvation. I mean, look, the Bible is filled with warnings about missing out. Jesus' parable of the virgins, some aren't ready. So like, can you miss out on what it is that God has for you? Yeah, that's called the whole Bible. People continually missing out what it was that God had for them, starting with Adam and Eve, going with the patriarchs, then the children of Israel, missing out on the promises God has for them. Yeah, I mean, like, so I'm not hung up on, so I don't want to give false comfort, like, no, you're all good. You're all good. You may have wasted your freaking life and need to wake up. That could be true.
That's huge. We need to pause for a moment and hear that, because like I have heard some people say, "Oh, you're going after God. You can't miss out." And I'm like, "Well,
what are you talking about? Yeah. Show me that. Show me that in the Bible."
Yeah, it's.
I mean, so the point is this. The point is this. What you're asking, which is the question I think we're all really asking, is like, can we trust God? Why would I go my own way? It's because I don't really trust him, Do I really believe that what God wants for me is my deepest happiness? And I don't think we believe that. Therefore, we're always going after other things. So, some people need like a wake up call. I mean, there's so much of the book of Hebrews is like a giant warning about missing out. That's the whole book. Jesus is better, and if you're not careful, you're going to miss out. The question is God's heart, because God is like, I don't want you to miss out. This is a plea of a merciful father. This is a plea of a jealous lover. This is the plea of a covenant partner. Let me read you my thing from this morning, mate. Hear my people. This is Psalm 81. Hear my people, and I will testify to you. Israel, if you would listen to me, there shall be no strange God in you, neither shall you worship any foreign God. I am Yahweh, your God, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And this is what he says. Open your mouth wide and I will fill it. But my people didn't listen to my voice. Israel desired none of me. So I let them go after the stubbornness of their hearts, that they may walk in their own counsel. Oh, that my people would listen to me, that Israel would walk in my ways. I would soon subdue their enemies, turn my hand against their adversaries. I would have fed them with the finest of wheat, and I will satisfy you with honey out of the rock. So what's the tone of this? It's God saying, why do you continually rebel against me? Come to me, everything you want for is ultimately found in me. So I want to give pastoral counsel that says, like, you can waste your life and you will have profound regret. And if you don't think that's true, you haven't spent enough time with the elderly. There's a lot of elderly folks who are like, I would give anything to have more time to redo my life. So it's this, like, in our desire to be kind and nice to people, we want to assure them that everything they've done is fine. That is like bad pastoring. That is bad theology. It harms people. The question is, though, can God redeem my mistakes and my wasted years? And the answer to that is absolutely, and that's the biblical exhortation. You want the years that the locusts have eaten restored? Come back to God. You'll be amazed at what he can do to what feels like, honestly, like God bending time around redemption is what it feels like. His capacity to accelerate things that have taken us years and close the gap. So I'm not a Calvinist. I don't believe in meticulous sovereignty, that every single event that happens is decreed by God. I don't believe that. I respect people who do, and I used to believe that. I understand why they do, but I ultimately don't think it's like you can proof text a lot of Calvinism and sovereignty of God in the same way that a Jehovah's Witness proof text. So, like when you've got people saying from the book of Proverbs, God makes all things for himself, yes, even the wicked for the day of judgment, as proof of reprobation, that God has destined people to hell. I'm like, well, it also says in the book of Proverbs that God will reward us wealth without painful labor. So I'm going to claim that one. You would call me a prosperity gospel if I claim that one, yet you're using a verse out of Proverbs to fit your doctrine. So to me, you can proof text a lot of things. I think the biblical point that what God is after is a restored relationship with humanity he's created to know him. And that, to me, is how you make sense of most of the scriptures.
Well, I appreciate you do have to empathize with Calvinists. It's not like they have a choice about what they believe anyway. So
Well, yeah, I mean...
That's my Calvinist joke for today.
I know. That logic always works so well on trivial issues, but it doesn't work in real life. Yeah, I mean, you apply that to someone with cancer. Well, they have no choice having cancer anyway. You know what I mean? I'm just pushing the logic. You're like, dude, you're taking my jokes away. Stop it.
It's okay. The other day I met a kid who had like 3 exits and was like worth 7 figures at 25. And I said, it was one of my most popular Instagram posts. I said, when I meet 24-year-olds with that much wealth, I get very Calvinist very quickly. And it's funny when I don't like the outcome, I tend to just go back and forth based on how satisfied I am with how things are. That's how Calvinist I am. So, and just, being intellectually honest. I do want to make sure we get to talk about the intentional father, because that is, from all the time I've known you, I mean, I've loved for also anyone who has not heard Jon Tyson's Controversial Jesus series and follow-ups, it is, man, you did such an amazing job. And since we're not Calvinist here, you did some great work too, of nuancing some extremely difficult positions. And I remember listening to one, and I won't spoil it, where I like, wait, does he agree? Wait, where's he going to land on this? I had no idea until the end. So you got to stay tuned. You never know some of them where he's going to land on some of these issues.
Mate. Those were straight up lectures.
They were fantastic.
Hour and 20, hour plus, yeah.
Oh, yeah. It was like, imagine if you can, something even better than listening to this podcast, and you have basically the Controversial Jesus. But from when I've known you, I have been so in awe of I remember that one of the first times, like, hey, mate, can we talk? And you're like, actually, mate, on a trip taking my family around to places where revival broke out, and I thought, what? That is the coolest thing. Like, love you, Dad, but you never took me to revival spots. So walk me through just how you started doing some of these amazing things with your family, and how that all led up to Intentional Father, and kind of your heart behind it. I have a lot of questions about the book, but actually, we should probably just talk about this revival thing too, because I thought that was such a cool vacation.
Well, I mean, love makes you do crazy things. That's it. I love my family, love my kids. So I tried to take some of my strategic energy and my cultivated wonder and thirst for God and build a family environment where my kids were exposed to the best of it. And so one of those things was like, hey, do we believe that God still does great stuff today? Yes, well then let's go see all the stuff he can do. Let me give you some history about what God's capable of doing. So it was really an amazing story. I had wanted to do this trip before my son graduated, while we were still sort of like a tight little family unit and everybody went their separate ways. So I wanted to go see these revival sites. I'd read all about them, and I wanted to just go stand there and pray as a family. Lord, do it again. Mark our lives. We believe you can. And then it's one of those miracles. Someone came up to me at church and gave me a massive check and said I was praying and felt God told me to give you this money to do a trip with your family. And it was wild. So the trip, I had a prayer patron who gave us the family the money to do it.
Did they know you were praying about this, or was this?
No, they don't know anything, mate. They just walk up. I didn't even know that person, honestly, had any money. Like, they gave me the check and I was like, gosh, that is a considerable amount of money. I just never would have guessed that that person had resources like that. So I'm so grateful for that. The church has been such a generous community. So anyway, we went to 17 places in the world where great revivals have happened as a family. That was it. We took a month, went around the world, loved it.
Did you make it up to the Hebrides?
Of course I did.
Oh, so I have to admit, I had never heard about the Hebrides Revival until you told me about it. And then I started looking it up, and I thought, this is and to the kind of Christian audience who is fascinated with studying faith. There are these revivals that have been well documented, and I'm left wondering, how do you explain away what happens at these things if you don't believe? I mean, because you read some of these stories out of the Hebrides and you go, I mean, what would explain people going to this obscure islands in thousands and droves and all these reports of healings and breakthrough? I mean, I don't know how to make sense of it.
The great gift of my life, mate, was I had 6 or 7 people from that revival still alive lay hands on me and pray for me.
Wow.
That was like one of the top 5 moments of my entire life. I felt the manifest power of God. I felt the embers from the flames still burning in their hearts. 70 years later, I could still feel it. They couldn't say the name Jesus without weeping, mate.
Oh,
They're in the 90s.
And again, for those who don't know about the Hebrides Revival, correct me if I'm wrong, 2 elderly sisters just were praying, right? And
Peggy and Christine, yes. One of them is a direct relative of Donald Trump.
I saw that video. I did.
The video is like not historically accurate.
Oh, okay.
Sadly, the Bible that they were like, a big part of it was like Donald Trump was sworn in on this Bible from the Hebrides. No, he wasn't. It's not true. The New York Times categorized, like literally reports on the Bible every president is sworn in on. It was a Presbyterian Bible from New York, I believe. But anyway, the relational connection is true. It's just 2 elderly women who just got desperate for God, meditating on His Word. There was the thing that stirred them. There was no young people in the parish coming to church. They just lost a generation. They were deeply burdened, so they gave themselves to praying sort of like 8 p.m. to 2, 3 a.m., 3 nights a week. Then some local elders, jumped in and started praying, and then it was just wild. I mean, they had manifestations of angels singing over them, open heaven, angels walking with them in the fields, visibly seeing creatures of light as they're walking along. The thing about the Hebrides is these people are so conservative. And I don't mean that like politically, whatever. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's zero hype with these people. Are not like wacky Pentecostals.
Right.
These people are like profoundly conservative people. This is amazing. Anyway, yeah, so that was a big part of it. That's like I wanted to sort of mark our family story, and I think it was just love for God and a desire to live a meaningful life that made me do it. And that's, I think, I've tried to make that a theme of my fatherhood, is to sort of like, I just came back from a trip with my daughter before she went off to college. We spent 2 weeks in Iceland. And mate, you want to talk about an immersion in... I've just never been anywhere more beautiful in my life. I mean,
that's my number one spot in the world. Is you like turn the corner and it's like golden fields with and it almost look like wheat fields, and then you turn and there's like black sand beaches, and Iceland is just
so wild.
It's the coolest.
So wild.
And then skyr, man. Do you have all sorts of the skyr yogurt, man? That's their thick protein
I think
yogurt.
We were too busy. I think we were too busy. I mean, gosh, what were we eating? We only had like one hot dog, which is the national food of Iceland, in Reykjavik. But I mean, anyway, it was just magic. But yeah, I took my daughter on a trip there. This, again, similar sort of a theme to mark her out. I took my son on as a part of like our manhood rite of passage, 500-mile hike across Spain, doing the Camino de Santiago together to sort of mark that out. So, and here's the thing: if you know me, I am like, in so many ways, the most typical, boring, normal person with a few bizarre quirks that make me occasionally do extreme things. And that is like, I tried to give that to my kids. Everyday love and joy with like big, massive things that shape them forever.
Oh, and they'll be grateful for that. So tell me, what led to the Intentional Father? You had actually started doing some of these activities with your son, and I'd hear about these and go, can Jon Tyson adopt me? I know I'm a 30-year-old man, but maybe I could tag along for these things. But what was the genesis of this book, and then what was your real heart that you wanted to communicate with it?
Well, 3 things. I mean, number one, I was just like, I loved my son. I mean, I had this divine responsibility to raise my kid in the fear and admonition of the Lord. And I just realized I don't know how to do that. So part of it was like love for my son. Secondly was like personal need. It was like, I'm so unformed in so many ways because of stuff I've been through. I need to close the gaps in my own formation. So there was like a desire to break off generational brokenness and let the blessings of my family and history flow through, but stop the bad stuff. And then the third one, I think there's such a need for it. I just read an op-ed in the New York Times this morning about like basically we're raising a generation of men who no longer have a place in the modern world. Just like the world's not designed. So the Wall Street Journal just an article that talked about like this lost generation. Boys are just dropping out of college because they sense the future is not designed for them. And so there's such a need. And like if an example, one of the number one ways to deal with racial disparities and stop injustice in the world is for fathers to be present and raise their children. That's like, that would take care of so much of the brokenness and dysfunction in our world today, but no one seems to emphasize that. Well, you're not allowed to emphasize it because it feels like the patriarchy or toxic masculinity or whatever. All of the sociological research is against sort of like those progressive hot takes. It's like, that's just not how it works. And so, you can go and research those stats, but the best thing you can do for a child is like let their biological father be in the home with them. It's ideal. It's not always possible, but I felt like a lot of dads didn't have any tools. There was 6 stages in male formation development and have historically existed in almost every society. We're the only one that doesn't have them. And so I was like, gosh, I got to research this and close the gaps and put something out there. So I was doing this with my son. I had a lot of other dads reach out like, yo, what are you doing, man? I feel like I'm just winging it. And I said, well, I've read all these books. I've sort of developed a plan for my son. And then at some point I turned it into a course called the Primal Path, where I basically talked through it, so it's like me on audio and video, just like talking through it. And there's a workbook that goes along with it. And then at some point I was like, it's got to become a book. And then David Kinnaman, my friend at Barna, who'd done a bunch of research on men's ministry, fatherhood stuff, all that, said, hey, let's do it together. And that was sort of how it happened. So I would say it's the most comprehensive guide to raise a young man from adolescence into manhood that's available. It's a big claim. But I was just say this: if it already existed, I would have just used it. I wasn't looking to write a book. I was looking to raise my son, and I just found a huge. There's some good stuff out there, but it just wasn't holistic. It was like, and it wasn't holistic. It was like, your son needs like a camping trip with other men where they, and I was like, that's great, but I got 6 more years with the kid. What do I do every day?
How do I in New York, camping isn't the easiest thing to achieve in New York City, right?
Well, I mean, like the Tetons, man, we got a lot of beautiful places. We've got the Pocono Mountains. You've got the Catskills. There's a lot of nature. But anyway, that was my point. So I just wanted to reclaim this ancient pathway that we'd lost, and in so doing, help form men that would like be good for society.
What are the 6 stages that the psychologist refers to?
So James Hollis, this stuff comes from James Hollis. He's the one that talked about the 2 halves of life. And he's a Jungian psychologist. A lot of his insights are sort of like where Rohr and Rollheiser get their thinking. He basically says that the 6 stages go like this. Number 1, radical removal from the regular society, sometimes kidnapping. They just would, like, when young men, because what happens is, particularly with young men, their bodies begin to change. Testosterone, competitiveness, erotic energy, understanding identity, desire to push boundaries. Like, all of this is happening inside the young man. And he's asking, like, what do I do with these energies that are driving me wild? They've got to be channeled in the appropriate place. As soon as they would notice these, they would forcibly remove him from the community of women and children. Number 2, symbolic death of some kind, like initiation that says basically you're entering into a new space. Number 3, they were given the story of the community, so they understood who they were as a people, the religion of the community, so they had a divine sense and understanding of the world. And number 3, the roles they had to be good at in order to contribute to their story and their people. Then they were sent out after this period of formation and education. They were sent out for what is called the Ordeal. And the Ordeal was where they had to test themselves with all of the internalized knowledge and see if they could manifest it in the real world. So, the Messiahs, you had to go kill a lion. In Australia, young Aboriginal men were sent out into the outback for up to 6 months, where there's hardly any food or water and everything that moves will kill you.
And how old are these kids being sent out?
Well, at this point, they're probably between 16 and 18.
Wow.
So this is like a couple of years in, but they need the sense of confidence from knowing that they have what it takes. Then they are brought back and they are recognized by the community of men, and then they are taken back and integrated into their community so that they can serve it and continue the sort of family traditions. So like that is almost universal. Now, what do we have? Okay, here's what we have. Kids on cell phones binging porn and violent video games. We have parents who are driven, probably overworking, fragmented and distracted. You got kids maybe joining sports teams, though maybe not. And they do get some often good formation, but honestly, it normally takes you away from your life. Like particularly travel sports can be very, very isolating and specializing. Then, what do you do then? I don't know. It's parents pushing you to achieve in a future that you're not even sure of. And then you graduate from high school, get drunk, lose your virginity. You get a car? What do you do? Then you go off into college and join a fraternity. And then when are you a man? How are you formed? In what way is that not just basically like hedonism for young men? Like it actually takes their worst desires. The ancient Greeks had 4 cardinal virtues: justice, wisdom, courage, and self-restraint. And they believed that like the foundation of all ethical behavior was that like we submitted our internal desires to these standards that produced a good society: justice, wisdom, courage, and self-restraint. And so when are those things ever formed in a young man? Instead of being just, they oppress. Instead of being wise, they're fools. Instead of courage, we're often cowards. And instead of self-restraint, it's a culture of excess. And all the cultural mechanisms we have facilitate that. So we're facilitating at mass the deformation of a generation.
So how do you fight back to that?
We got to do something about that, mate. The stakes are high. And I think the Christian church is one of the places where we have a rich opportunity to do this, because you get a web of relationships. You're not on your own. The typical person in America is very isolated. They rarely live in the place they went to college, where they form most of their friendships. Their work friendships, you can't be fully vulnerable, and often those relationships are transient. Pretty fragmented, overworking. Often, if you have a second home, it's taking you away from your primary community. So, but the Christian church has like a family, is what Jesus called it. And so you've got this web of men with the same vision and a heart to serve and give themselves away. I think it's the greatest opportunity for the church in America right now.
So what did you do? Did you drop your son off in the middle of the ocean, or what did you? How did you actually implement some of these 6 stages?
I sent him off for a gap year. I mean, I designed a 6-year process. Sent him off for a gap year, and he went around the world. Went to Swaziland, he went to Nepal, he went to Guatemala. Just to sort of like irreparably break his heart for the global poor.
Was he stoked on that, or did he? I'm curious. Was your son like all in on this? Was he like, dude, Dad, you are so cool? Eventually.
No, I don't think my son has ever been like, oh, Dad, you're so cool.
Well, how does that conversation start when you're like, hey, son, good news, I booked a trip for you. Oh, thanks, Dad. Here's the thing. You're going to come back next year, and you're going, like, how does that conversation even go down?
I mean, I basically sat him down and laid it all out. I mean, I gave him a ceremony of initiation and mapped it all out for him, and had a big, like a blackboard from Restoration Hard, like, one of those big blackboards, felt more ancient, and wrote out the whole thing. Just said, here's the next 6 years, man. Wow. What was his initial reaction to that? Fear and excitement. Cool. It's like, so I did it with a community of his friends as well. So he wasn't just like isolated on his own, and it was just like an incredibly rich experience, man. I'm honestly so grateful for it. And I try to capture that story and then help dads build that out themselves. I wanted to give them a pathway. Here's how to do this for your sons. So let me ask you, so much of what you said just hit home in the sense, and I have the older I get, the more respect and empathy I have for parents who literally one day leave a hospital and there's no manual, and you're just like, good luck raising this sovereign. That's it. That's how society works. Like, you're just like, and so like, it's funny as I watch my friends who are parents now, and like, they're like, I have no idea what I'm doing. It's like, oh, my mom and dad had no idea either. But I never had anything like these stages. I mean, the closest thing about going off, and it seems the rite of passage in middle class, Western society seems go to college and sort of prove yourself that you can live on your own. But if you missed out on these stages, and I mean, this really resonates. Like, what do you do if you never had some of those experiences? Does he say that is reparable, or, what do you do to the generation of people who never experienced the, death of that season and just kind of thrown out there? So for the men who are, I guess like me, like 35, who never went through those stages. Just lean into your own formation, mate. Lean in. Jesus will take you right now. Ask for help. Commit to a process of growth. And this, to me, is the good news of the gospel. It's never too late. Turn your heart, read deeply, read widely. But I think we really do have a chance to sort of God never gives up on us. If we draw near to him, he'll draw near to us. Ask our Heavenly Father to teach us and to shape us and to help sort of fill those gaps in. But that's a whole nother episode. You're talking about, you've shifted from parenting to men's ministry at this point.
I love it. Well, it sounds like you can read The Intentional Father, even if you're not a father, and you can apply that with your relationship with God and see
the amount of dads who've read this and have literally said, this is for me, it's not even for my son, is honestly kind of staggering. So I think it definitely helps, because 25% of the book is helping dads deal with their own story, make sense of their own story. So
that's amazing. Well, folks, it is The Intentional Father. You're going to want to listen. Have you done an audio version? Do you narrate it, or does Samuel?
It's me, mate. The 28th.
Okay, so it's not
September
Samuel
28th.
Jackson. It's in Scottish accent. It's The Intentional Father.
Yes, that's it.
Well, Jon Tyson, I know you got to bounce to somewhat more important podcasts or whatever, but thank you so much for doing this. And folks, definitely pick up this book and tune in to Jon Tyson. Any series besides The Intentional Jesus you want people to listen to, or the Controversial Jesus. I loved that one, but
oh, mate, I mean, I don't know. They can listen along if they want, if it's helpful. I wrote another book called Beautiful Resistance, which I think is pretty helpful for following Jesus in this sort of challenging territory. But whatever, mate. It's just whatever is helpful. People can follow along, read along, listen along.
All right. Well, folks, this has been Kind of Christian with Jon Tyson. Jon, thanks for being here, man.
Peace, mate. Loved it. So good.
Thank you so much for listening to Kind of Christian. Hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review.